Welcome to Data in Construction. I'm Hugh Seaton. Today I'm here with Eric Leighton, President and CEO of LoadSpring Solutions. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
So we've had the pleasure of a couple of your colleagues talking about what LoadSpring does, and I wanted to take this opportunity to ask you, what's your vision for data and analytics, generally and maybe specifically to AEC and construction?
Okay, well, that's a great way to start. We've been in this project control space now for a couple of decades and really working to understand the challenges that our businesses face, our customers face, specifically, a lot of AEC type companies, but it also could be oil and gas in the energy sector, nuclear, manufacturing. We service a lot of project controls applications in that space as well. And, at the end of the day, I think project controls users as well as companies, they get a bad rap. They're constantly being told that they're 10 years behind in technology, right? And so maybe in one of the other podcasts from one of my peers, they talk about that digital transformation and what we've built with our cloud platform to help these companies get into the 21st century. And that's kind of been a personal goal of mine in building LoadSpring is I really have a vision of kind of leapfrogging that being 10 years behind. Because I work with these companies day in and day out. They certainly don't think 10 years behind. The problem is they build buildings and they build roads and bridges and they construct telephone lines and they put in fuel transportation lines across thousands of miles. And so it's hard to be focused on technology when your business is focused on building stuff. And so we've really inserted ourselves into that niche place for these companies to provide them hosting technology and cloud technology and security so they don't even have to think about it. And so my vision for LoadSpring and the next evolution of LoadSpring is to really take a look at the struggle these companies have with the enormous amounts of data they're producing, right? You think of, a standard company is running 400, 500, 600 projects at any given time, producing terabytes of data almost on a monthly basis. And that's just one application, right? Typical engineering construction company is going to be running 5, 6, 7 different applications from estimating, geospatial, BIM, obviously scheduling, contracting, cost management. They've got this stable of applications all producing data. And now they have all this data and they're having a really hard time making heads or tails of it. So my vision is to continue to bring the project control space into the 21st century from a digital transformation standpoint, a cloud standpoint. And now let's take them on a journey to get them access to their data in a way that they can analyze it and actually answer questions. And eventually, I think, get them to what they all want. The big buzzword today is AI, right? How can I have my data tell me things I didn't even know how to ask? And that's really what we're trying to do here at LoadSpring.
That's a great way to encapsulate the vision, right? Is getting data to a place where it can tell me things I didn't know to ask for. And there's some way stations along the way that you've sort of implied that maybe are worth digging into. And the first one is knowing what you have, right? I mean, I think one of the things that LoadSpring, I think, provides is a broader view than any given application would, right? So you're giving them a view of everything, or at least everything that's in your system. And you find that there's some surprises that people are like, wow, I didn't know we had all this.
Yeah, I think, well, the surprise is when they find out how much of their information is inconsistent. Particularly, we see this across divisions, right? So they might have a scheduling app that's used by 6 different divisions. And those 6 different divisions are actually using simple things like different naming conventions, different cost codes, different ways of scheduling. So you have this interdivision problem or challenge that they're faced with for consistency. And then you have inter-application inconsistency. And that's a big one as well, right? You look at the folks that are running your cost app aren't using the same coding and naming conventions as the folks running your scheduling app, right? And so, we built a product we call Project Intel that its main function is to bridge those gaps. It's to identify and align business units that are using the same application and align applications that may be in one business unit but don't match the applications that are being used by other business units. And that starts to really wake companies up into the challenge around analytics when they start seeing how far off it is.
Because, I mean, implied in what you're saying, but let's make it explicit, is to run analytics on things, they all have to be apples. You can't be summing up apples, oranges, and pears and Ferraris and hoping that you can run any analytics against it. So job one, right, is to make all of your numbers, all of your data, so in such a way that you can aggregate it and do things to it, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly right. If you look at your end game, when we started chatting, our end game is I want the data to tell me stuff I don't even know how to ask, right? The example I like to use with customers is imagine a day when I'm looking at my projects and I'm trying to figure out what it is about the last 100 projects that I ran that caused some of them to be on time and on budget, and a lot of them to be over on time and over on budget. And I want to try to figure that out. And I realize AI could potentially tell me that, hey, did you know that every project that used a red cement truck to pour the foundation was on time and under budget? And every project that didn't use the red cement truck was over on time and over on budget, right? That's kind of the simple analogy I use around AI. I would never think that the color of a cement truck would be causing my projects to be out of whack, right? But I can't get there yet. I can't get to AI because of my data is so inconsistent both across division and cross applications. And I can give you some specific examples of what we see when we run a customer through our Project Intel system. And let's look at an example where a customer has about 500 active projects. What we're finding, and what we do is we ask them, give us 5 questions you want to answer, right? So we're not at the AI point yet. We're just saying, hey, there's 5 things about your project you want to know. Tell us what those 5 things are. So, okay, here's our 5 things. And we go in and we ask Project Intel to identify projects that can answer those 5 questions. And we run the simulation, we run the data flow, we bring it into a big giant non-SQL database, and we extract out the projects that can answer those 5 questions. And what we find across a sample of 500 projects for a typical customer, that less than 10, I'll repeat, of those projects actually have unified data to answer those 5 simple questions. So the analytics that companies are running today, that they're investing in today, and they're getting nice charts and graphs and KPIs, the bottom line is that they're sampling less than 5% of usable data in their projects. That's a super important thing to know in order to know how much you can trust your analytics. Remember, I'm not even at AI yet, because of course, doing AI, when I only have 5 projects worth of data out of 500 that are accurate, it's going to be useless to me, right? So we got to get the usable data up to a more reasonable, statistically reasonable number, somewhere in the mid to upper 90% usable, which is what our Project Intel will do for a company.
And one of the ways that people get at this is this data governance idea. So I've had some folks on the podcast talking about that. And often there's this hope that it can be done from the bottom up. And I think that that's not how things generally work. It feels like what Project Intel and your service generally does is give people a mechanism to start enforcing data governance. Is that something you guys help folks think through?
Yeah. So data governance it's got a lot of different terms, but in general, I think that term works for me. And there are 2 challenges with that to the business. Number one, it's very expensive to identify what it is, best practices and standard naming conventions and standard cost codes and things like that. There's a huge expense in identifying that. Usually it involves an outside consulting company. And the second issue is time. takes a long time to do that, right? And then the third challenge with that is adherence to that. So you might be able to identify bad process or bad workflows in a scheduling process. You might be able to absorb the 6 to 8 months it takes to figure all that out and try to adjust it. But the third problem, which is the hardest problem to solve, is actually getting people to follow the governance. And what we've seen, and again, we've been doing this for 2 decades. What we see is companies trying those steps 1 and 2, and then getting some level of buy-in for step 3, and a year later checking in on that process, and it's all fallen apart. The governance has fallen apart. People aren't following process again. There's a natural, and so I've kind of looked into why does that happen. Some of it's application driven, right? So the application itself doesn't lean itself to adhere to a certain workflow, right? The mental brain power to do a scheduling app is different than the mental brain power to do a costing of that same schedule, right? It's different types of people. They think different. The apps are different. And so the apps themselves don't necessarily lend themselves to conforming to a governance set of standards. And then third is kind of the cultural aspect between business units. The telecom unit is a much different group of people than, say, the engineering unit, right? They're just different. They're trained different. They have different backgrounds. They're working on different types of projects. And so companies really challenge with that. So what we've noticed in the last, probably just the last 2 years, is companies are now trying to skin that cat, right? Okay, I spent the money. Maybe it was $1 million in consulting for the last 2 years. I've taken the time. My analytics are still not there. My governance is starting to fall apart. So what else could I do to solve that problem? Well, one way they're trying to solve that problem is with integrations. And so they're looking at, well, okay, which application controls the project? Let's just say in this company, it's the scheduling app. That's what controls the project. So now we're just going to integrate all of the other applications' data into the scheduling app. And where are you again? You got the same problem. You've got a cost problem. It's going to cost a lot of money to create those integrations. You got a time problem. It's going to take another 6, 8, 12 months to build those integrations. And then you've got a compliance problem because those software packages are constantly updating, processes updating, and now I've got to maintain those integrations, right? And so what we've found in the data part of our journey with our customers is they still can't solve this problem. And so what Project Intel will do is, and I think the key element of Project Intel is, let's first sever the connection between your data and the source application. So we're going to extract your data into a non-relational database that is irrelevant and no longer connected to your source data. Okay, that's going to speed things up a little bit. I don't have to worry about changing process or shutting down process. The next thing I do is I'm going to build my data lake rather than dumping millions of records into what I think is a data lake. Some people call it a data warehouse. A lot of people are now calling it the swamp, right? Instead of dumping everything into the swamp and then trying to sort through it and then trying to go upstream with governance and get people to do it right, so the swamp will maybe somehow magically clean itself out, we do it different. We come in and say, hey, let's start simple. Tell us the 5 questions your business wants to answer. Now we're going to go identify the source data that can answer those 5 questions. And we're going to bring as much of it in as we can. But more importantly, we're going to identify the location where we can't get it, right? Is it a business unit problem or is it an application problem? And then we're going to simply give you the option to transform the process or simply transform the data. In some cases, you might say, yeah, that's this group not following process. Let's fix the process. Now more data comes into that lake. But the only data allowed in that lake is clean data that can answer those 5 questions. That's it. And so it's small. It may only be 10,000 records instead of 10 million records, but it's 100% accurate, right? And so I'm going to slowly do a give and take between governance and just transforming the data when it's easy. And now I'm going to get to a clean lake of data. I'm going to add 5 more questions and then 5 more questions. We think that most businesses only need to answer 30 questions. And once I get to 30 questions answered, I'm probably going to be able to be at around 95% data usage at that point through this iterative process. The time of that to do that is probably 6 months, not 8, 12 months, 18 months, less than 6 months to do that transformation. The cost is fractions of the consulting cost. And the best part, to your point, that started this part of our conversation, it's now under control. It'll never change. So once that's in place, the data that's produced will always be good data. Now, once and for all, and we think when a customer starts with us and with their Project Intel journey, that within 12 to 18 months, they now will be in a position across their entire enterprise to be able to start considering AI. But they have to stick with this plan for at least 12 to 18 months, get that data lake built up, and now they can contemplate AI. Right now, you go out and ask any engineering construction company, when do they think they can get to AI? And the answer will be, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Really interesting. So what I love about what you just described is rather than saying we're going to go and fix all of our systems because they need to be fixed, and then we can go ask, what are we going to do with it? You anchor in the fastest path to value to the customer as you can, which is, let's take 5 questions you care about, and we're going to clean up the path from production to storage of that data so we know you can do something with it. So forgetting for a moment about AI, which almost by definition means a lot of data, you can start running analytics that you trust relatively soon, as opposed to at some point in the future when we get all of, you're not boiling the ocean first, you're boiling a pot of water to make some pasta.
Yep. Yeah. And, for us, we've always been a very focused company, which is, I think, what's really lended and given us a lot of success by, step one, let's focus on project controls, right? Everything project controls, that's where we're going to stay focused as a business. And we're going to do that really well. And, today in 2022, we can check that box no matter where we are in the industry. Our support is considered second to none. Our security, knock on wood, second to none. We've never had a hack in 22 years. We know security inside and out. But more importantly, we act as that glue between the business and the applications. And we've always been really good at that. And so now we want to take that next step in our vision and our evolution to apply that same type of methodology to extracting really good information from the business systems and the source applications that our customers use. And we don't want to go any further than that. We don't want to become an analytics company. What we see in industries and customers around the world, whether it's in Europe, Asia, Australia, United States, Japan, everyone has kind of their own view on the KPIs and the analytics they want to see. And we see quite a wide range of capability at the customer side. If you ask me the question, how many companies have an analytics team and data scientists, right? I couldn't answer that question because it's different across the board. Some companies have made that investment in folks that know Power BI, for example. They might have a small 3 or 4 person team with Power BI in the company, and they may have now 1 or 2 data scientists on staff. And I could show you another enterprise company that has none of that. One of the biggest construction companies on the planet. They're just building that team now. So they're in a different place when it comes to analytics. So our job in this next phase of development is let's just focus on the data and getting the data into a pristine lake that can now be analyzed. If you want us to give you the analytics, we do have a set of 10 canned analytics that most project controls companies want. We can plug that in. But if you want us to then, take those 10 and customize 5 more, we'll bring a partner in to help you do that pretty cost effectively. And if you want a complete set of custom analytics that your team has built in-house, we just plug them in, right? So we can really fit into wherever the customer is, right? And that's what we want to make sure LoadSpring does, is we're always where the customer wants to be, but more importantly, we're also where the customer already is. And you hear a lot of companies talk like that. Google's a good one to say that. We always want to be where the customers want to be. LoadSpring looks at it a little different. We want to be where we think they should be, but we also want to be where they are today, right? And marry those two components or visions together to help Sherpa the company to success and understanding how to run their business better, ultimately.
Well, that's another way of describing what you just talked about, right? Is that they have the systems that they have, and they have the data, whether it being labeled or however the data is being produced, the way it currently is, which is not optimal. And you're I like the word Sherpa. You're taking them from where they are now to where they need to be, which is a well-managed, unified, clean data lake. Really interesting, because I come across a fair number of contractors that are standing up data lakes, often a little before they've got a solution for governance or a broader solution like yours. You know what I mean? Where they're standing up a lake because that the idea is, well, let's get started, let's learn along the way. The problem, of course, is an S3 bucket full of unindexed PDFs doesn't teach you a lot. Now you got to manage terabytes and thousands of pages of PDFs somehow that maybe you remember where they came from. I mean, I don't want to paint it as too negative. These are smart people that are figuring it out. But really, you're saying same general idea, which is let's create an abstraction above all of these applications so that we can manage and do some translation if necessary, or whatever it takes to get from where they are now to this idea of a clean data lake. I really think that's really exciting. And I think one of the things that you've talked about is leapfrogging the painful and expensive process of getting it wrong and saying, oh my God, we've got terabytes of stuff we got to throw out, or pay someone to do something with.
Yeah, and it's interesting, coming from a mechanical engineering background, and oftentimes people ask me, how did you get from University of Maine, mechanical engineer, then did some fatigue and fracture mechanics for my master's degree in mechanical engineering. How do we get from there to here in the project control space, right? And I think the other 2 founders of LoadSpring are also mechanical engineers. And what mechanical engineers are really good at is taking big, giant, complex problems and making them smaller, right? And solving the small pieces first. And my approach to data has really been to more of a logical approach. What frustrated me, both at LoadSpring with our development team and our data scientists, maybe 3-4 years ago, is they're constantly telling me what I could do. And analytics guys, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to your podcast will understand this, right? You talk to anyone in analytics and they'll say, wow, if I run a BI, look, you could do this, then you could do this. And if you want to look at the data this way or look at the data that way, I can do any of that. Just tell me what you want to do, right? And then all of a sudden everyone's frozen because the project people are like, okay, but I don't know what I want you to do. And then you go up to the business side, the CXOs or the project directors, the folks that are actually in charge of these projects. And they're just sitting there scratching their head because they're looking at the analytics throughout the course of the beginning phases of a project. And all the SPI and CPI numbers are all green. I'm on schedule and I'm under budget. Everything's green. Everything looks great. And all of a sudden, the last 3 months of the project, everything goes to red and you're upside down. And so the business people are like, well, I know what I want to see, but I'm not seeing it. So you've got these 3 groups going on in the AEC space and really the project control space, and none of them are communicating right. So we are coming in and saying, look, guys, let's flip this around to what questions you want to answer. Let's start there and work our way back and find the problems and fix the problems that we need to answer the questions, rather than trying to dump a bunch of data into a swamp and now I don't know what to do. I can do everything I want, but I don't know what to do. And I had a guy tell me once, if I have 5 gallons of clean water and I dump a pint of dirty water into that 5 gallons of clean water,
Yeah.
I now have 5 gallons and a pint of dirty water.
Right.
Right. And so what we're saying is, let's put a quart of clean water in the tank, and we only allow clean water to go in the tank. And we're going to build that tank so that dirty water never gets into that tank. And the only way to do that is tell me what questions your business needs to answer first. And it seems to me quite a logical way to go at it. But when we talk to customers, they look at us and say, wow, that's brilliant. And it's, let's figure out what you want to know first, and let's build the data to give you the answers to what you want to know. And if we do that well enough, Hugh, right, across, like I said, this isn't going to happen overnight, but if we do that well enough in the first 6 to 12 months, you're now going to be staring down the ability to do AI in 12 months. Now I'm going to do AI on a crystal clean data lake, and it's going to be able to tell me answers to questions I don't even know how to ask. And we're confident we can get our customers there in a very short order for a lot less money than they're doing, going kind of the governance and the application control route.
I love it. So let's kind of bring this in for a landing, and let's think about what are some things that somebody, from a vision standpoint almost, what are some things that someone might not know to ask for that would help them run their business better? You mentioned some, it can be sometimes random, like a red truck. Have you come across examples where people have, whether it's AI or just good analytics, where people have discovered things about their business that they're like, oh my gosh, this really makes a difference, and I never would have looked there?
Yeah, well, a big one that comes up with our customer base is productivity. We have a lot of customers that have no understanding of productivity within their organization. We see a lot of companies trying to determine productivity, but what Project Intel really is unveiling when we start to look at productivity type questions that they want answered is that, again, where we kind of started, and it is different from company to company, but some companies are discovering that their business unit productivity is radically different. Their telecom division is super productive, and their engineering division is literally the opposite. And that's very eye-opening for them when they start answering that question. And when it's business unit, it actually drives competition. It's kind of, you go back to the 90s when New York was, I remember going to New York in high school, and it was a scary place, right? And how did New York change that? New York changed that from being a kind of out of control, scary place to a data-driven policing model that was quite remarkable. If I just measure, I know what questions to ask and I measure it, then I can actually create a safer city. And today, New York City is one of the safest cities in the world because they actually know what questions to ask first. So we're kind of taking a similar approach for our customers. Take a look at the questions you want answered. And sometimes productivity is something we hear a lot. And then let's look at productivity across applications, and let's look at productivity across divisions. If the organization is organized that way, they're not all organized that way, but most are. And quite often the division difference in productivity for that one question is pretty significant and eye-opening for the organization. When it comes to productivity per application, it's usually pretty uniform. So what that tells you is my people like the applications that they're using, and they're productive when they're using it. But when I'm looking across divisions, the usefulness of those applications is not being leveraged uniformly across the enterprise from division to division. So just answering that one question can tell you a lot about your organization and where you can identify opportunities to get more efficient and more productive so that the cost of your projects always ends up under budget.
Excellent. I love this approach, and I think it really is the right time for the construction industry for sure, because you're seeing a lot of demand for this. How do we manage all of this data? Well,
yeah, I agree.
Eric, this has been wonderful. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Hugh. Been awesome being here.
Thank you for listening to the Data in Construction podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your preferred podcast provider. And if you're interested in learning more about data in construction, sign up for our monthly skills webinars or the Data in Construction book coming out later this year. You'll find signups for both in the podcast notes. Thank you.